And welcome to today's 10 at 10. Last week and this week, we're focusing on some of the questions that are coming up again and again for accountants. Some of our questions are very much coronavirus focused, but more of our questions are general issues that are coming up that we want to share with you. Today I'm joined by Colm, and we're going to look at a specific coronavirus topic, which is anti-money laundering. Obviously, when coronavirus came, all the focus was on the wage subsidy scheme, and the focus still is on the wage subsidy scheme. Then we looked at financial reporting and auditing, but the general broader issues around the operation of your business, the operation for you as accountants, everything is impacted here. So many things are impacted and changed. So we do have a free webinar coming up this week. So on Thursday afternoon at 3 o'clock, we do have a 90-minute webinar, and we have the topics. We'll circulate the details of those topics to you by email later in the day or maybe in the morning. But we're covering off on some of the topics that didn't make the cut for that webinar. That's why we're running these 10 and 10s. Now, wherever you're watching, be it LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, on our Facebook groups, Twitter, if you put your query in the comments, Jonathan is monitoring the query. So if you have any questions, put them in the comments and Jonathan will feed them back to us here and we can answer them. Today, our focus is on anti-money laundering. Colm, you've got 4 considerations for anti-money laundering during COVID-19. So maybe do you want to share?
Yeah, well, of course, Des. Yeah, and really, yeah, exactly what you said. I'll just put it up there. There we go. There we are. Yeah, it was just like, to be honest, obviously following on from Friday, so where we discussed some AML considerations on professional appointments, and actually in fairness, and then reading over the last week and over the weekend that potentially we could be, going back to phase 2. So like a lot of that will cause major issues anyway. But I think this kind of brings together a couple of points and problems that firms were asking us about. Well, how do we deal with anti-money laundering? All to do with in terms of you've got social distancing. You have firms who are still. Now I know a lot of firms have already opened up their offices. They're doing blended staffing, rotation of staff, but some firms are still only aiming to be opening this week and maybe later on. So we're still working from home, we're still socially distancing, and we're still not meant to be gathering in bigger numbers. So this brings up a number of issues regarding AML. And we like the first one is to do with obviously risk assessments. And a key point here basically is look, are your procedures robust enough that you can perform, a sufficient, appropriate customer due diligence with not being able to meet or potentially not meet face to face with your clients. So you're taking on a new client, and you can't, the traditional way when you go out to their office, you'd meet them, or they come into your office and you'd meet them and you'd gather all that information. But if that's restricted, how are you dealing with that? That's kind of really where the point's coming from.
Yeah, and we might say, because what we're seeing, Colm, is that there is movement in clients. That people are changing accountants. So we're seeing some accountants who are experiencing a significant surge in inbound inquiries and winning new business. So there's, from a geographic perspective, the other thing that we're seeing, Colm, and COVID has definitely covered up this issue, but Brexit is also still happening.
That's kind of the elephant in the room,
Some of our Profit Pro members last week, I was speaking to them in the one-to-ones, they're experiencing significant levels of overseas inquiries from the UK about setting up here. So there's a COVID issue here too, well, if we're not meeting people face to face, but then there's also a general issue, a globalized business that businesses are looking to set up in Ireland, and because this session obviously is focused specifically on our Irish accountants. Is there a requirement, Colm, under anti-money laundering, or is this too simplistic, that if you don't meet face-to-face, that you've got to go down the route of enhanced due diligence, or do you just need to assess the risk
you're assessing the risk exactly. Like it is like not meeting the client face to face doesn't necessarily mean it's an automatically high risk and you're required enhanced due diligence. But it would be a big factor to take into account if you can't do other procedures. Like, and the point there is basically it's an increased level caution that the firms need to be aware of. If you can't meet your client face to face, is the inability to conduct your documented procedures. That's not meeting the client face to face.
So if our anti-money laundering procedures manual says, well, we meet people face to face, and if we don't meet them face to face, we've got to do enhanced due diligence. If we're not making that immediate jump, well, then we've got to justify why not, and why are we deviating from our procedures.
Very much, and I obviously I don't want to bring this onto monitoring business, but this will be what reviewers will look at. They'll say, well, look, I know you've taken on these clients during COVID-19. How do you justify just doing your normal standard customer due diligence on the client because you haven't actually met them? And that's the now, like, we've got Zoom, we've got like MS Teams, we got all these things. Like we're doing this now, so I can see you, you can see me. So to me, like, that's as good as meeting. It's probably better than meeting someone in a room, because as you said, the meetings are more snap. So it's just recognizing and assessing that the inability to meet someone could impact CDD.
And the interesting thing for Irish accountants, when you compare them to UK accountants, is UK accountants have software platforms and providers who do all this for them, whereas in an Irish context, because the market isn't as big, there's less technological and alternative options, so it's more traditional money laundering identification. The likes of IDPal, for example, is a company, but some Irish accountants say to me that, well, they don't want to incur the expense. So if we're going down the traditional route, look at the modifications. So certified copies. I presume with legal firms opening up column, certified copies of documents are becoming more and more available. But what else is happening here?
Like the whole idea of moving on from say customer due diligence, your risk assessment, you're now looking at verifying the ID. So exactly, like, as in, now this would have been more applicable when the offices were closed, but there's a possibility we could be going back there, maybe, I don't know, back to phase 2. Some offices may close again. In terms of, well, how can you verify the ID if there's no one there to verify it? Like, if a tree falls in the wood, doesn't make a noise. It's that kind of thing. So how can you do it? So you just need to be able to. And the second point there, and it goes back to monitoring business, you need to be able to demonstrate the provenance of the copies. So how have you verify that this is an original true copy of the passport or driving license or the ID. It is getting a lot easier when as firms are opening up and law firms are opening up. It's just you just need to and obviously things like ID panel and various things that is assisting, but it just needs to bear in mind that the certified copies is the route to go. Uncertified, it isn't the best route.
Yeah, one thing I learned from Stripe a number of years ago, Colin, when I set up a Stripe account, one of the ways that Stripe do remote account verification, and obviously they've now got facial recognition software and other tracking software, but one of the things that they actually got people to do was on a camera situation like this, to literally hold up the passport or the driver's license, to hold up the passport.
Exactly, and I've heard that being done, and like, it's all about, let's get down, it's all about demonstrating on the file that you've done your customer due diligence and you verified the ID and you've done your risk assessment. Like, we're all talking to firms, who are doing their best doing this. It's something that will come up and bite them in the backside if there's an issue in the end. So if it be it by cab arriving the doorstep, or the guards, or whatever, or worse, the reviewers come in and tear the system apart. We all know we're doing our best. We're working through COVID-19, but it's just to bear the point in mind, bear these This should be the top of your mind when you're talking about AML. Okay, I'm doing my AML, brilliant, but what do I need to worry about? What do I need to be concerned about? So it's customer due diligence, risk assessment, how am I verifying the IDs?
And there's something that I've been talking about, Colin, for a long time that's very, very unpopular in many quarters. But that is the fact that in an Irish context, that we are slow to implement money laundering legislation. Yeah. And because we're slow to implement money laundering legislation, there's a lot of pressure coming from a lot of sources. And I see last week now, Ireland has been fined for not implementing the money laundering legislation back in 2017 on a timely basis. And we have a situation now where we're in arrears on the 4th directive. We have a situation where the Money Laundering Compliance Unit in their annual report every year is raising questions. We have seen how the institutes have tightened up on money laundering in the last 12 to 18 months. So all of this is, you know, when accountants are doing their best, sometimes what we've said before is, well, accountants are doing their best. We're sure that in monitoring visits that, you know, that will be taken into account. But the difficulty here with money laundering is Ireland in a money laundering context, your institutes in a money laundering context, there is pressure on to comply. So, you know, we can't just say, oh, well, it was coronavirus. You have to have answers. Timing of client due diligence, Colin.
Yeah, like, you know,
and very basic. Client due diligence and money laundering comes first before we do anything or before we engage. Now, practically, that doesn't happen. What do you think reviewers are going to be looking at here in the next 12 months, 24 months, when they come in to do money laundering visits around the timing piece during coronavirus?
Well, like, you know, like in fairness to the legislation, it does say obviously it should normally be completed before entering a business relationship, but it does say, look, occasionally it may need to be completed while the business relationship is established. So in the middle of it. Now, I don't think it had COVID-19 in its mind when that was phrased, but obviously there are situations where you may not be able to complete your CDD or your risk assessments fully before entering into a business relationship. But you know, the key base is you know, you need to document whether or not there's any risk of anti-money laundering. So it's kind of like a chicken and egg or a catch-22. You know, you don't, without doing enough of it, you don't know if there's a risk of money laundering, especially if it's a new client. Like maybe if it's a referral, okay, you can kind of rely something on that. But if it's a you know, a brand new inquiry, you've no background to it, you know, your spotty sense should be going up there saying, level of caution here. Maybe we need to, you know, roll back and say, look, we need to get this stuff done. I know getting new clients is an important thing, but, you know, what reviewers are going to be looking at are going to say, well, look, you know, you've done your CDD, you've done your risk assessments, you know, you started the assignment, you know, when did you close off on this? Did you do anything? You know, you shouldn't be signing things off. You shouldn't be transferring client monies or anything like that until it's done.
So the important, if you just go back onto that slide there, Colin, your last point, delays are only allowed where there's little risk of money laundering. So people who've potentially taken on clients during coronavirus, really, you need to have documented why, if you haven't followed full procedure, that you perceive the risk to be low, justify your perception of risk being low, and that will cover yourself, and then on an expeditious basis. So many new clients across your door, we can justify there's limited risk of money laundering, but we do get questions on an ongoing basis where accountants come to us and say, well, I've got this scenario, this scenario, this scenario. What do you think? And, you know, you've got to be careful. Some clients, by all means, deferred due diligence, but other clients, not the case.
And the point is, as you said, you still got to gather enough information. So you still got to do some kind of, you can't just like take them on and work away. You still got to find some kind of information to gather to assess the risk. Some way of doing it, you'll probably be able to do that from a Zoom call or whatever. So what you're looking at basically is the last bit of the triangle where you're certifying the IDs and things like that. But you've gathered enough information. You've got the set of accounts from the CRO, or you've spoken to the client, or you've got your, you know, you bounce it off the referral person, the person who's referred to you. So you're gathering your knowledge of the entity to assess, okay, there's probably little or no risk of anti-money laundering. We'll go ahead, but we got it before we start signing things off. It's a pushback from the client as well. Like, as in, I can't do anything for you until you give me the stuff. And if they're serious about coming on as a client, they'll do it.
And there's ways and means. We're finding ways and means of doing anything in these times, and we're doing things differently than how we would have done them before. Colm, just one thing that I want to highlight on your slides is, Colm has talked about key employees not working due to self-isolation or illness. And I think that this is a very, very simple and practical point. And this is something I've heard in the last couple of weeks. So, oh, my practice manager or my front of house person, and they've been remote working, so we haven't been able to do the money laundering. That's not a justification. That's not an excuse. And the firm is responsible for doing the money laundering. If your existing processes and procedures, technical and practical, aren't working, you've got to find a workaround. Saying that your lead money laundering execution person is out due to risk or whatever just doesn't cut it.
Yeah, like exactly, like that's not going to fly. You're going to have, you know, either a deputy MLRO or someone else that can take on the mantle of where someone is there, like because it'll come on to the last, like this is the last slide. Your internal and external reporting procedures, they don't change. So, like, you know, like obviously the office knows what they do for an internal procedure. They go to the MLRO, but obviously if the MLRO is not there, there needs to be someone else there to take the internal report. And then external reporting, well, that's online. Like GoAML is online. Okay, revenue isn't. That goes in the post. But you know, the GoAML is online. Revenue just want a copy of the SDR in the post. There's nothing stopping that happening. The key point is basically the internal procedures and basically justifying and whether or not it needs to be escalated up to an external report. And like, you know, to come back to the thing about not having employees not there. Again, you gotta have a backup plan. So do you have your deputy MLRO or assistant MLRO who can take up the mantle to allow the reports to be made, and then maybe consult over the phone with the MLRO if they're self-isolating. Obviously, if they're ill, we can't do that. But again, it goes back to the firm's responsibility, and there should be no issues regarding reporting. But again,
so some firms are fully back in the office, but what we're seeing is a lot of firms, they have a combination situation going on where some people are back in the office and some people aren't back in the office. And you know, I think at this stage we're not necessarily saying right now we need to update your money laundering procedures manual. And there is going to be an update on your money laundering procedures manual once the 40 EU directive is enacted in Ireland, swiftly followed by the 50 EU directive. We're late again on those directives, so we're definitely late on the fourth. So could be more possible fines coming down the track. I would imagine the fine last week is going to prompt some significant action and prompt response around money laundering. So I'm not necessarily suggesting that you go on and update and create a new money laundering procedures manual to deal with coronavirus. I think depending on whether the virus can be contained and how the future is going to look for us in the long term, maybe there will be addendums for coronavirus. But right now, I think firms need to communicate with their team and remind them of the firm's responsibilities under money laundering obligations and deal with, so who specifically does the IDing, who does the risk assessment? But Colm's last point here on internal reporting procedures, reminding everybody, look, we still have internal reporting procedures, we have our MLRO, and how to go about practically dealing with risk of money laundering. So get that out as by way of a team meeting, possibly get it out by way of a memo that you communicate in writing with people saying, here's how coronavirus is currently impacting, this is what we're doing as a firm. And I think to have that type of a correspondence or communication with your full team, that's going to help if in the future anything does go wrong, that, well, A, we're taking proper steps, this is what we did, and you know, that you've got evidence so that if somebody
put that on the file, put that on the file, yes, exactly. Like that's brilliant, because that goes on the file. That proves to the likes of me and my old hat coming in, going, well, lads, you did nothing. Here we are. We understood coronavirus. We understood the issues. We were on the webinars. We know the problems. We have an addendum to our procedures because of COVID-19. All the staff know about it, and it's working. There you go. And it's part of your training and your annual training as well. So you've dovetailed a number of things in one simple, half an hour memo, half an hour conversation with the team, and hopefully cover yourself off. Obviously, go off and do it then.
And I suppose the whole idea behind Colin sharing slides with you today, and I'm sure Jonathan can make the slides available to people somewhere after the event. Actually, when people register, JR, if you're on the call here, anybody who registers for our webinar on Thursday afternoon at 3 o'clock. It's a free webinar, free 90-minute webinar. It's some of the Knowledge Hub technical team. Anybody who registers for that, we'll make sure that you get the slides. But essentially, our slides are the training. This 10 and 10, and Colin, you see, he's not very good at time. His 10 and 10 is gone to 20 minutes. But this 10 and 10 is about, this is what you need to train your team in to cover yourselves from a money laundering perspective. And this is what we do in Knowledge Hub. And Knowledge Hub is about giving you the information to get you covered, to get you on track, get ahead of the issues, solve the problems, and resolve the issues. So, Colin, any final comments on money laundering before you go, or have you covered it all?
I think I have. It's just basically, again, look, it all comes back to my three favorite words: documentation, documentation, documentation. No matter what, be it AML or audit or non-audit, just make sure it's on the file and make sure you've covered it off and you're following your procedures.
Okay, so folks, if you have any questions, our webinar is on this Thursday. It's on this Thursday, the 23rd of July. It's on at 4 o'clock or 3 o'clock this Thursday, from 3 until 4:30. If you have any questions for that webinar, please do email them in, put them in the comments, and the team have some questions they're going to cover. But if you have specific questions you want to cover as part of our Knowledge Hub event, we're happy to do so. So thanks for joining myself and Colin here today. Colin, thank you for the material. JR, thank you for the recording. Thank you for your time.